All right, if you've been struggling with your color grades looking overcooked and inconsistent, this video is for you. Hi, my name is Carson. I am a trained colorist in DP, and in this video, I will be breaking down my entire node setup that I use to create a consistent, clean film look across all of my footage, and will work on your footage too. I'll be breaking down the structure, what effects I use, where to place your LUTs, and how to color correct your footage in a way that is clean and delivers accurate results. And of course, you can buy my LUTs, but you don't have to. There is a link in the description, and they will make your life a lot easier. So if you're ready, let's get started. All right, so we've got multiple clips in the timeline here, and these are a mix of Sony and Canon clips. And we've also got a vertical clip here. So everything up until this point is Sony, and then these two clips right here are Canon. So we'll be working with multiple color spaces, different log profiles to show you that this will work and is consistent across both of them. All right, so let's get started. We're going to come to our gallery where we find our PowerGrade. I call this my film base. We'll just drag that on over here. And at first, nothing really happens, but I'm going to give you a walkthrough so that you know kind of what's going on here. This first node, which I leave off by default, is noise reduction. I turn this on if I need to, and then do all my noise reduction in the motion effects tab. And then this node has our input device transform. This is basically just a fancy way of saying converting from the log color space to a different color space so that we can color grade in it, and then back out to Rec 709 with our output device transform right down here. Our next node is our CC, or our color correction node. This is just where we use our HDR wheels to adjust exposure and white balance. Moving on, we have our curves, which is where we adjust our contrast after our color correction so that we're remapping the data properly. And then this node that we have turned off right now, this is a mask if we need to do any power windows, brighten up any areas, darken any areas, things like that. And then after that, we have our blur node, which is basically just a radial blur applied to the edges. I like to keep it pretty low and then increase it as needed. This just makes it so it adds kind of a swirly effect on the edges and takes off some of the digital sharpness. So I like adding this. It's not everyone's taste, but I like the look of it. After that, we have our FPE, which is our film print emulation. Under our effects tab, we have our film look creator set to clean slate so that we're not getting any effects applied immediately, so we can really control everything from our vignettes to our halation and bloom, stuff like that. And like we said earlier, right here, second to last node is our output device transform. Now you'll notice that our input device transform goes from whatever our log profile is, which we can set right here, to DaVinci Wide Gamut and DaVinci Intermediate, and our output device transform goes from DaVinci Wide Gamut and DaVinci Intermediate to Rec 709 and Rec 709A. This is so that we can work in a wider color space and our footage behaves properly and gives us some more room to push around the colors and exposure than we would be able to in a standard Rec 709 color space. And then the last node I have here is LUT. This is just where I'd apply any kind of a lookup table that I want if there's a specific look I'm going for. And sometimes I'll add more nodes in here. This is just what I start with, and then I can add more nodes as I see necessary. So let's start shaping our footage. First, we're going to go with our input device transform, come up to our effects panel, and we're going to change this to slog3 and sgamma3.cine. And now we are properly converted. All right, so in our next node is where we would adjust our exposure and white balance. I like to do this in the HDR tab, since it gives you much more accurate photometric controls compared to all the other tools in DaVinci Resolve. So as we shift our white balance slider, it's as if we're shifting it in camera, or at least as close to it as we can get with log footage. And our exposure slider, if we do plus 0.25, that is literally 1/4 of a stop of light being added, or minus 0.25 would be going down 1/4 of a stop. And with this, you have the option to move about 6 stops up and 6 stops down, giving us about 12 stops in total to play with. For this, I think I want to move up just a little bit, not much, just something like that. Moving on to our curves, this is where I want to adjust my contrast curve. I prefer to do this with editable splines turned on. I like to drag my white point down just a little bit and then create a nice ramp into my highlights. Drag my black point up a little bit and create a nice ramp into those shadows. What we've done by dragging our white point down and our black point up and creating that subtle S-curve is we're compressing the dynamic range in the image, giving it a much more natural film-like response. As far as our blur goes, we'll go into our effects and we'll go ahead and turn this up to see if it's doing what we want it to. Something like that. Now for the film print emulation node, there are two main options I go with. We can use the filmic creator, which I have set on here by default under clean slate, or we can use the color slice tab. I'm going to give you a little demo of both. Under our presets, we have a bunch of different ones. All of them are a little too heavy handed for what we're going for here. Even the 65mm, which sometimes I like, is a little too much. So we're going to go ahead and set that back to clean slate. And we've got a lot of options under here that respond similar to the way that film would respond. We've got our exposure slider right here. We've got our contrast, which has a much more filmic contrast curve. We'll zero those both out. We've got our fade, which kind of just brings up that black point, and I like using this a little bit. We've got our white balance here, and we also have subtractive saturation and richness, which I end up using a good deal on my footage. But we're going to go ahead and zero those both out, which takes a lot of color out of the image, but it's not the same as saturation. Personally, my favorite tools in here are vignette, bloom, halation, grain, things like that. So we're going to go ahead and turn on our vignette here. I like this default amount right here, and then we'll go with halation. And then we're going to go ahead and turn on bloom a little bit here. We're going to zoom back out. The bloom is kind of adding a little bit of a glow to the image. Then we're also going to add some grain. I like to zoom in a bit here because it gives us a better idea of what we're working with. And we also want to take our saturation and take it down just a little bit. I do like a little bit of color in my grain, but not a ton. And then if we zoom back out on our image and turn the filmic creator off and back on, you can see we've added just a little bit more punch to the image. Now the other settings I like to mess with are in our color slice tab. Now I like to add a little bit of density to the footage just because it takes away some of the digital looking color. And then we have our hue, saturation, density controls for our individual colors. So for our skin tones, we can go ahead and drag this to make our skin tones a little bit more pink or a lot more yellow. Now let's go ahead and turn off all of our effects, turn back on, and you can see we've come a long way. Now if we turn off everything except for our device transforms, that way you can see everything we've done. We've really come a long way from this kind of grayish blue looking image. We did our color corrections, our curves to adjust our contrast. We didn't need to do anything with masks. We added the blur and we did our film print emulation. And then we'll just apply the same PowerGrade to the rest of the clips, adjusting the color correction as needed. And you can see it looks good across both the Sony and Canon clips. I'll also usually throw in one of my LUTs at the very end of the pipeline just to give it some polish. So that's a brief overview of the color correction color grading process that I've been using for a good bit of my projects lately.